Snow fell like ash over the frozen forests of Belgium. The world was quiet, too quiet for war. Only the distant echo of artillery reminded the men that peace was still far away. It was December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. The German army had launched one final desperate attack, and the small town of Bastogne was surrounded. Inside that frozen circle stood the 101st Airborne Division, cold, hungry, and outnumbered. Among them was Private Daniel Reeves, 23 years old, from Kansas. He had a letter in his pocket, half-written, stained with dirt and snow. It began with simple words. "Dear Anna, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home." But Daniel wasn't dead. Not yet. He sat inside a ruined farmhouse, his hands trembling from cold, not fear. Outside, the wind howled through broken windows, carrying the smell of gunpowder and pine. Around him, his brothers in arms tried to stay warm. Some prayed, some cursed, and some just stared into the white horizon, waiting for dawn or death, whichever came first. Corporal Hayes broke the silence. "They've cut the road again," he said. "No food, no ammo, just us." Daniel nodded, folding the letter slowly. "Then we make it count," he said. "Every last bullet, every breath." Hayes looked at him and laughed without humor. "You still writing to that girl back home?" "Yeah," Daniel said softly. "Gives me something to hold on to." That night, the temperature dropped to 20 below. Men's boots froze to the ground. Some lit fires in helmets, risking sniper fire just to feel their fingers again. The snow kept falling heavy, endless, merciless. Daniel pulled out his letter again, hands shaking as he wrote by the faint glow of a candle stub. "It's strange, Anna," he wrote, "how a man can be surrounded by hundreds and still feel completely alone. They say help is coming, but the sky's too white for planes. I don't know if I'll ever see Kansas again, but if I don't, I need you to know I wasn't afraid." The candle flickered. Outside, the sound of engines rolled in the distance. German tanks. The men scrambled to their positions, rifles ready, hearts pounding. Snow exploded in the air as the first shells hit. The farmhouse shook, windows shattered. Daniel dropped the letter, grabbed his helmet, and ran toward the door. The ground outside was chaos-white snow turned black with smoke. Machine guns barked from the tree line. Men shouted, ducked, fired, fell. Daniel crawled behind a wall of sandbags, firing at shapes that moved through the mist. Hayes was next to him, shouting over the gunfire. "They're coming in from the east! I see them!" Daniel yelled back. A shell landed nearby. The blast threw Daniel backward. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing. When he opened his eyes, the world was muffled, like he was underwater. Hayes was gone. The wall was gone. Only snow and silence remained. Daniel tried to stand, but pain ripped through his side. He looked down. A piece of shrapnel had torn his coat open. He pressed his hand against it and crawled toward the ruins of the farmhouse. Inside, he saw the letter lying in the snow. He picked it up with blood-covered fingers. "Not yet," he whispered. "I'm not done." He dragged himself to a window and looked outside. The Germans were advancing line after line through the snow. And behind him, his brothers were running low on ammunition. He took a deep breath, reached for the radio, and called in coordinates. The artillery support they'd been told would never come. Static answered. Then a voice crackled through. "This is Eagle Command. Fire mission approved. Are you sure about those coordinates, soldier?" "That's close to your position." Daniel closed his eyes. "Do it," he said. "Drop it right on me." He looked at the letter one last time, his breath fogging the air. "If I can't make it home, maybe I can help them get there." He pressed the button again. Fire! The night erupted. Shells fell like thunder, tearing the ground apart. The sky turned red, then white, then black. When it was over, the forest was silent again. The enemy had been pushed back. And in the middle of the smoking snowfield, they found Daniel barely alive, clutching the letter to his chest. 2 days later, the siege of Bastogne was broken. American tanks rolled in. The men were saved. Daniel woke up in a field hospital, wrapped in blankets, snow melting from his hair. A nurse smiled down at him. "You made it," she said softly. He tried to speak, but his throat burned. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed her the folded paper. "Can you mail this?" he whispered. The nurse nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will." Weeks later, back in Kansas, Anna Reeves opened a letter with shaking hands. The ink was smudged, the paper torn, but the words were still clear. "Dear Anna, I'm writing this from Bastogne. It's cold here, and sometimes I forget what sunlight feels like. But every time I think of you, I remember why I'm fighting. If this letter ever reaches you, know that I kept my promise. I didn't give up. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because you gave me something worth dying for. Anna pressed the paper to her chest and cried not from sadness, but from pride. Months later, Daniel came home. His body carried scars that never fully healed, but when he saw her waiting at the station, he smiled through the snow and whispered, "I told you I'd find my way back." They say the snow still falls over Bastogne every winter, and somewhere beneath it lies a torn page of a letter, a promise kept by a soldier who refused to surrender. Because some letters aren't meant to say goodbye. They're meant to remind the living why they're still here. When Daniel opened his eyes, everything was white. Not snow, just light. Bright, endless, blinding light. He thought for a moment that he was dead. But then came the sound-muffled voices, boots crunching snow, a faraway engine rumbling through the fog. He blinked, and faces appeared above him, helmets, American ones. "You're all right, soldier," a medic said, kneeling beside him. "You're one lucky son of a gun." Daniel tried to speak, but only a cough came out, smoke, blood, and cold air burning his lungs. He looked around. The forest he'd fought in was gone. Trees were splintered, blackened, and still smoking. The farmhouse was just rubble now. And scattered through the snow, his brothers, some alive, some still, some staring into nothing. "Hayes," Daniel whispered. "Where's Hayes?" The medic paused. "Didn't make it," he said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. The pain in his chest wasn't from the wound anymore. He'd saved them, yes, but not all of them. He was loaded onto a jeep, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of gasoline and iron. As the vehicle rumbled through the shattered woods, Daniel watched Bastogne fade behind him. Smoke still rose from the horizon like ghosts waving goodbye. Every bump on the frozen road sent pain through his ribs, but his hand never left the letter in his coat pocket. The paper was stiff, now frozen with blood and snow, but it was still there, still his. Hours later, he arrived at the field hospital near Luxembourg. Rows of white tents stretched across a muddy clearing. Inside, the air was thick with disinfectant and whispered prayers. Men moaned. Doctors shouted, nurses moved like ghosts between the cots. When Daniel woke again, it was night. The lights were dim, and rain tapped softly on the canvas above him. He felt the bandages tight around his chest and the dull ache of morphine in his veins. Beside his bed sat a nurse, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. "You're awake," she said gently. "You've been out for almost 2 days." Daniel tried to sit up. "My letter, where is it?" She reached into a small tin box and handed it to him carefully. "It was in your pocket. We thought it was a report, but when we opened it, we saw it was personal." Daniel took it, staring at the torn edges, the fading ink. He didn't care how bad it looked, it was everything he had left. The nurse hesitated. "Who's Anna?" He smiled faintly. "Home," he whispered. "She's home." Outside, thunder rolled through the distance. But this time it wasn't artillery. Just rain, real rain. The kind that washed away the ashes and blood. Days passed, the siege of Bastogne ended. Reinforcements poured in, bringing food, blankets, and laughter sounds no one had heard in weeks. Men who once looked like ghosts began to look human again. Daniel watched them from his cot, weak but alive. He'd done his part. He'd survived the impossible. But even then, something inside him stayed frozen, a quiet promise echoing in his chest. That letter wasn't meant to be the end of his story. So one morning, before dawn, he asked the nurse for a pencil and clean paper. "I need to write another one," he said. She smiled and handed him a sheet. "Same person?" "Same person." He nodded. "Different reason." And under the dim light of an oil lamp, Daniel began writing slower this time, but with a steadier hand. "Dear Anna, the last time I wrote to you, I wasn't sure I'd ever see the sunrise again, but it came brighter than I remembered. I don't know why I survived when so many didn't, but maybe it's because someone had to tell their story. Someone had to make sure the world remembers them." He paused, looked out at the wet horizon, and for the first time in months, he felt warmth. Because the war had taken almost everything, but it hadn't taken his voice. Spring came slow to Kansas. The snow melted into rivers that ran through the empty fields, and the sky turned that soft golden color that only exists after a storm. The train rolled into the small station just after sunrise. Daniel stepped down carefully, still leaning on a cane, his uniform worn, medals tucked inside his coat. He didn't care much for them. He only cared that he was home. The air smelled of soil and lilacs. Birds sang like they'd never heard of war. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing it all in, the kind of peace that felt unreal after so much noise, so much death. Down the dirt road, past the wooden fences and wheat fields, he saw her standing on the porch, hands over her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. "Anna," he whispered. He tried to call out, but his voice cracked. She ran to him before he could take another step, throwing her arms around him so tightly it hurt, but he didn't mind. For the first time in forever, he felt whole. The war didn't feel so loud anymore. They walked home together in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots. That night, Daniel sat by the window with a cup of coffee, the same cup he'd used before the war, chipped and faded now. The moonlight spilled across the table where the letter lay unfolded, the one he never sent. Anna sat beside him, tracing her fingers over the torn paper. "You really thought this was the end?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled faintly. "I thought it was goodbye." She looked at him, eyes wet. "And now?" He took her hand. "Now it's a reminder." Outside, the wind moved through the wheat like ocean waves. He stared out into the night and thought of the men still buried under the snow in Bastogne. The ones who'd never made it home, whose stories ended in silence. But his didn't, and he knew that meant something. Years passed. The war became a story, a photograph, a lesson in a classroom. Children played in the same fields where soldiers once trained. And Daniel, older now, hair gray, hands trembling, kept the letter framed above his desk. One morning, a young boy came to visit his grandson, wearing a school uniform. He pointed to the letter. "Grandpa, is that the one you wrote in the war?" Daniel nodded. "It is." "Did she ever get it?" the boy asked. Daniel smiled gently. "She did now." He handed the boy a copy rewritten, clean, words no longer stained with blood and mud, but still carrying the same message. Even when the world falls apart, hold on to love. It's stronger than fear, louder than war, and it's the reason we keep coming home. The boy read it quietly, then looked up. "Can I keep this one?" "Of course," Daniel said. "It's your turn to remember." As the boy ran outside, Daniel looked out the window again. The same Kansas sky, endless and blue. For a moment he saw the snow again, the forest, the fire, the faces of his brothers. And in that quiet reflection he realized something. He hadn't just survived Bastogne. He had carried it. Every loss, every promise, every heartbeat that never stopped echoing. He whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, boys, for getting me home." Then he leaned back, eyes closing slowly, the faint sound of wind and church bells carrying him into peace. When Anna came in later, she found him smiling, the letter still open beside him. It was never just a goodbye. It was a promise kept. Years later, visitors at the local museum would stop and read it. The last letter from Bastogne, written by Private Daniel Reeves. Some read it and walked away quietly. Some cried. But all of them remembered. Because sometimes survival isn't just about living, it's about why you live. And in that frozen forest long ago, a soldier had found his reason and turned it into words that would outlive him. The screen fades to black. Soft piano rises, and a single line appears. "For every soldier who never got to send their last letter, we remember you."